The first industrial cities did not wake up to coal. They woke up to something that once breathed. Before steel rails carved continents, before oil wells pierced the earth, a living creature fueled the night. Street lamps flickered with the fat of giants. Factories hummed because something immense had been hunted, cut, boiled down. We like to imagine progress as mechanical, clean, inevitable. But the earliest industrial glow carried the memory of salt water and blood. What if the modern world did not begin in a mine, but in the open ocean? In the late 18th century, cities feared the dark. Night meant danger, crime, uncertainty. Then came brighter lamps, cleaner flames. Whale oil burned steadier than tallow, brighter than expectation. Ports like Nantucket quietly transformed into energy capitals. Ships left not for adventure, but for fuel. Barrels returned heavier than gold. Every flame in a window represented a journey across violent seas. Illumination was no longer local. It was global. The ocean had become a supplier. But supply chains built on living bodies carry a tension few wanted to name. A whale was not just an animal. It was inventory, a floating refinery. Crews pursued them for months, sometimes years. When harpoons struck, the ocean itself seemed to recoil. The process was brutal, methodical. Blubber rendered into oil on deck, smoke rising over restless water. The smell traveled before the ships did. Yet investors saw numbers, not waves. They saw margins widening with every captured body. Energy demand in London, New York, and Paris did not ask where the light came from. It only asked for more. And the sea answered, at first. Whale oil did more than light streets. It lubricated the delicate machines of early factories. Fine clockwork, textile looms, precision instruments. Industrialization required smooth motion, and whale oil delivered it. It resisted freezing. It burned clean. In a world still experimenting with power, this mattered. Economies began to orbit around something harvested far from land. The distance made it easier to ignore. Out of sight, out of conscience. Progress felt cleaner than it was. Yet beneath the polished brass of machines lingered the residue of something organic. Something hunted. We often tell the story differently. Coal mines, steam engines, iron rails. The narrative feels solid, mineral, grounded. But before coal dominated, whale oil financed expansion. Profits from voyages built banks, insured ships, stabilized trade routes. Maritime capitalism matured in the shadow of flukes and fins. Some of the earliest American fortunes traced back not to land, but to open water. This was not a side industry. It was infrastructure disguised as hunting. And infrastructure rarely looks dramatic when it is working perfectly. That is why it hides so well. At its peak, whale oil was not exotic. It was normal, ordinary, necessary. In cities like New Bedford, fortunes rose quietly from docks that smelled of salt and smoke. Investors didn't romanticize the hunt. They calculated it. Ships became floating assets. Crews became risk variables. A whale sighting meant dividends. Insurance tables expanded as quickly as harpoon range. This was not chaos on water. It was coordination. Contracts signed in warm offices echoed across freezing seas. The system felt stable, predictable. That illusion would not survive the appetite it created. Here is the turn few expected. The brighter cities became, the darker the ocean grew. Success did not stabilize the industry. It intensified it. Ships sailed farther. Seasons stretched longer. Whales grew scarce near familiar routes, forcing expeditions toward remote waters. Efficiency demanded expansion. Expansion demanded risk. What once felt abundant began to thin. But demand did not thin with it. Street lamps did not dim politely in solidarity. They burned as usual. The system had been built on growth. And growth rarely knows how to slow itself. Scarcity changed behavior. Voyages became longer, harsher, more desperate. Crews signed contracts that could keep them at sea for 3 or 4 years. Isolation thickened. Discipline tightened. The hunt was no longer seasonal opportunity. It was obligation. Investors expected returns regardless of distance. Meanwhile, cities expanded their appetite for light. Workshops multiplied. Newspapers printed through the night. Financial exchanges stretched beyond sunset. The rhythm of human life began to detach from daylight. And every extra hour awake quietly depended on something hunted beyond the horizon. There is a quiet irony here. Industrialization promised liberation from nature's limits. Yet its earliest momentum depended entirely on nature's body. Whale oil made night productive. Productivity redefined value. Time itself began to feel elastic. Hours stretched because lamps allowed them to. Markets extended into darkness without hesitation. This shift felt progressive, even triumphant. Few paused to consider the exchange rate, one massive life for thousands of illuminated windows. The arithmetic was invisible, but it existed. An invisible arithmetic can reshape civilizations before anyone notices the cost. The industry grew sophisticated. Ships were financed through layered investments. Risk was distributed. Profits were shared across networks stretching from New England to Europe. Whale oil was no longer just fuel, it was a financial instrument. Futures were informally calculated. Supply forecasts whispered in counting rooms. The ocean became a variable in economic models long before oil wells were mapped. It felt modern in its complexity, yet its foundation remained primal. Steel hooks, wooden decks, human endurance. The tension between abstraction and brutality widened each year. By the mid-19th century, the ocean was no longer vast in the imagination. It was charted, measured, monetized. Expeditions pushed into the Pacific, into Arctic corridors once considered unreachable. What had been wilderness became territory. Each new hunting ground was logged like a newly discovered mine. The language shifted. Not whales, but yields. Not voyages, but returns. This subtle change mattered. When nature becomes vocabulary for profit, hesitation fades. The sea no longer felt sacred. It felt available. And availability is a dangerous illusion when demand refuses to sleep. In cities, few sensed the strain. Light still flowed. Workshops still hummed. The illusion of permanence held. But on distant waters, crews whispered about emptier horizons. Days passed without sightings. Weeks sometimes. Silence settled where once there had been movement. The hunt grew tense. Every splash could mean salvation or nothing at all. Investors read reports with tightening margins. Insurance premiums adjusted quietly upward. The machine of growth began to creak. Not loudly, not yet, but enough for those listening closely to feel the first fracture forming beneath the surface. Then came a new discovery. In Pennsylvania, thick black liquid seeped from the ground. At first it was curiosity, then possibility. Kerosene refined from petroleum burned bright and cheaper, cleaner than expected. The timing was not accidental, it was economic gravity. As whale oil grew scarce and expensive, alternatives felt less risky. The market did not mourn. It recalculated. The ocean had powered the first wave, but another energy waited beneath soil. Progress did not hesitate. It pivoted. And pivoting can feel like betrayal to those still at sea. The shift was quiet at first. Orders decreased. Voyages delayed. Investors diversified. Some ships returned to find fewer buyers waiting at the docks. Warehouses that once emptied quickly began to hold inventory longer than comfort allowed. Markets are not sentimental. They follow price and efficiency. Whale oil had once been both. Now it was neither. The very success that expanded demand had accelerated depletion. And depletion opened the door to substitution. A new fuel did not need to conquer. It only needed to outlast. For sailors still hunting, the news arrived slowly. Letters carried rumors of falling prices. Some crews pushed harder, hoping one final profitable voyage would justify the risk. Others sensed the tide turning and feared returning home to irrelevance. The ocean felt colder. Not physically, but economically. A whale sighting no longer guaranteed security. It guaranteed uncertainty. The great engine that had seemed unstoppable now hesitated. And hesitation inside a growth system can trigger something far more destabilizing than collapse. It can trigger doubt. Back on land, refineries processing petroleum expanded rapidly. Kerosene lamps spread through households that had never afforded whale oil. Accessibility changed the social equation. Light was no longer a luxury tied to dangerous voyages. It became common, predictable, cheap. What once required months at sea could now be drawn from wells inland. The geography of energy shifted beneath the economy's feet. Ports that had thrived on blubber felt the ground move. Not violently, quietly. That quiet movement would redraw maps of wealth. This was the real break. Not a storm, not a rebellion. A price difference. Petroleum did not defeat whale oil in battle, it undercut it. Efficiency replaced endurance. Geography replaced oceanic risk. Investors followed returns with familiar discipline. Capital migrated inland. Ships were sold, repurposed, abandoned. Generations trained for the hunt faced a narrowing horizon. The industry that once felt foundational began to feel temporary. And nothing unsettles a civilization more than discovering its foundation was transitional. Yet the story is not about defeat. It is about pattern. Whale oil revealed a template: extract, expand, saturate, replace. The ocean had been the first frontier of industrial energy. Land would follow. The logic remained intact. When one resource strained, another emerged. Progress advanced not by purity, but by substitution. Each transition carried its own costs, hidden at first, visible later. The whales had been the beginning of something larger than themselves. An energy appetite that would not easily shrink. Look closely at the ark. A living creature became fuel. Fuel became profit. Profit became infrastructure. Infrastructure reshaped time itself. Then time demanded more fuel. The cycle tightened until scarcity forced innovation. Innovation displaced origin. This rhythm feels familiar because it repeats. Not with whales now, but with other materials, other frontiers. The early industrial glow was not innocent. It was experimental, and experiments rarely conclude without residue. The question is not whether progress moves forward. It is what it consumes while moving. By the time petroleum fully dominated, many whales had already disappeared from familiar waters. Recovery would take decades. Some species never truly returned to former abundance. The ocean remembers in ways markets do not. Yet cities rarely pause to reflect. They had new fuel, new confidence, new horizons. The age of whale oil closed without ceremony. No grand farewell, just quieter docks and different investments. But beneath that quiet ending lingered a lesson, one easy to ignore when the lights still shine. The confidence of the petroleum age felt earned. Wells seemed abundant. Extraction appeared simpler than chasing shadows across oceans. Pipelines replaced sails. Refineries replaced tryworks. Energy moved inland, closer to political centers, closer to control. This shift created stability, at least on the surface. Investors preferred land to waves. Governments preferred resources they could guard. The volatility of the sea gave way to the illusion of permanence. But permanence in energy has always been temporary. That is the quiet truth buried beneath every boom. From a distance, the transition looks efficient, rational, even humane. Fewer ships at sea, fewer harpoons thrown. Yet the appetite did not shrink. It expanded. Cheaper fuel meant more factories, more transport, more night turned into day. The system did not correct itself. It accelerated. The lesson of whale oil was not restraint. It was scalability. Once humanity learned it could reorganize nature into energy, it never truly slowed down. It simply found new bodies to reorganize. There is an uncomfortable continuity here. The first industrial light depended on a hunted giant. Later lights depended on buried forests turned to liquid. Different sources. Same logic. Extract, burn, expand, replace. Each era believes its solution is cleaner than the last. Each era inherits consequences it prefers not to examine too closely. The whale oil economy feels distant now, almost archaic. Yet its structure survives in modern supply chains. The surface has changed. The rhythm remains. Imagine standing on a quiet dock in Nantucket today. The air no longer smells of rendered blubber. Tourists walk where sailors once waited for months of uncertain return. The past feels distant, almost softened by nostalgia. But beneath that calm surface lies a forgotten volatility. An economy that rose quickly and pivoted just as quickly. Fortunes made on whales were not eternal. They were transitional. And transition is rarely comfortable for those inside it. Energy transitions are often described as breakthroughs. They are also displacements. Every new system leaves someone behind. Sailors, shipbuilders, dock workers, skills perfected over generations, suddenly less relevant. The glow of progress can cast long shadows on communities that built the previous era. The whale oil economy did not collapse in a single dramatic moment. It thinned. Contracts shortened. Investments shifted. Attention moved elsewhere. Sometimes history does not explode. It fades. And yet, something endured. The financial techniques refined in whaling, risk-sharing, insurance structures, distributed ownership, did not vanish. They migrated. The industry dissolved, but its logic survived. Capital learned from the ocean. It learned how to fund danger, how to calculate uncertainty, how to scale extraction across distance. Those lessons would later power railroads, oil empires, global trade networks. The whales were not only fuel. They were teachers. This is where the story turns inward. We often celebrate innovation without tracing its ancestry. But every modern convenience has a lineage. Electricity remembers kerosene. Kerosene remembers whale oil. Whale oil remembers open water and harpoons. The chain is longer than we prefer to admit. When we flip a switch, we rarely imagine the bodies once required to extend the day. Distance protects comfort. Forgetting protects certainty. But history remains, even when unspoken. There is a silence after industry's end. Not dramatic, not loud, just space. The whale oil era left such a space behind. A pause between fuels. In that pause, oceans began slow recovery. Markets recalibrated. New habits formed. Silence can feel like closure, but it can also be warning, because the pattern that replaced whale oil did not disappear. It simply moved forward, carrying the same hunger under a different name. So when we look back at the whale oil economy, it is not only a story of ships and flames. It is a story about scale, about how quickly a resource can move from abundance to exhaustion when woven into financial systems, about how easily necessity becomes normalization. The world did not intend harm. It intended light. That intention does not erase impact. It complicates it. And complication is where honest history begins. The first industrial nights were powered by something alive. That fact does not fit neatly into progress myths. It unsettles them. Yet it also clarifies something essential. Every age believes its energy is temporary only for the past, not for itself. Whale oil once felt indispensable. Then it faded. One day, our current fuels will feel just as transitional. The lights will still glow, but the question will remain the same. What did we burn to keep them on?